Listen to this carefully, because what I'm about to tell you will change the way you experience anger forever. There are people in this world who have stopped being able to get angry, not because they repress their emotions or pretend to be saints, but because they saw something that cannot be unseen. They discovered the origin of their anger, and that discovery disarmed them completely. Have you ever wondered why certain people infuriate you, while others do the exact same thing and barely affect you? Why the same attitude triggers you one day and leaves you indifferent the next? The answer is not in others, it never has been. It is buried in the deepest layers of your psyche, in those dark corners you spend your life avoiding. The anger you feel towards someone is not about that person, it is about you. Every time you get angry, you're reacting to a mirror that reflects something you refuse to acknowledge within yourself. People don't make you angry, they show you who you are when you're not watching yourself. Let me take you to an uncomfortable place. When someone betrays you and rage consumes you, it's not the betrayal that burns, it's the memory of all the times you betrayed your own truth. When someone belittles you and you explode, it's not their contempt that hurts, it's your own self-contempt that you've been carrying for years without admitting it. Others are simply unconscious messengers of your unhealed wounds. You get angry at the liar because you don't want to see the lies you tell yourself every morning. You get irritated with the selfish person because you can't bear to recognize your own selfishness disguised as kindness. You rage at the manipulator because you've manipulated situations 1,000 times and you know it. And the most dangerous part is that this mechanism works automatically, without you noticing. Your mind projects outward what it cannot process inside. It's easier to point the finger than look in the mirror. It's more comfortable to blame than to take responsibility. Now comes the part that truly scares. There were people who reached this understanding, and something broke inside them, not traumatically, but in a liberating and at the same time devastating way. A woman who spent 30 years getting angry at her mother discovered one day that every maternal criticism was simply the echo of her own inner voice judging herself mercilessly. When she saw it, when she truly saw it, she could no longer get angry. She tried to feel that familiar rage, the one that gave her identity, but she only found emptiness, because she understood that being angry with her mother was being angry with herself, and that game no longer made sense. A man who hated his boss discovered that what he truly detested was his own cowardice in following his dreams. The boss was only the visible embodiment of his internal renunciation. When he accepted that truth, the hatred disappeared. Not because the boss changed, but because the man stopped needing an external villain to justify his internal victimization. This is not cheap philosophy or self-help wrapped in pretty words. It is the raw mechanics of the human psyche. Carl Jung called it the shadow, that territory of your being that you deny and repress. Everything you reject within yourself doesn't disappear, it's simply projected onto others, and then you react in horror when you see it out there. Anger is the perfect defense mechanism because it allows you to externalize the conflict. If the problem is outside, you don't have to change anything. If the other is the culprit, you can continue being the hero of your own narrative. But when you understand that every person who angers you is showing you a part of yourself that you don't want to integrate, the game ends. There are no enemies anymore, only involuntary teachers pointing toward your wounds. And here comes what is truly revolutionary. Between stimulus and response, there exists a space, a small abyss, where all your freedom resides. Viktor Frankl expressed it with brutal clarity after surviving the concentration camps. That space is where consciousness can operate. When someone insults you, It is not the insult that generates your anger. It is the instantaneous interpretation you make based on your past wounds. That millisecond between the external stimulus and your emotional reaction contains all the power. The people who stopped being able to get angry discovered that space and expanded it. They learned to pause right before reacting and ask themselves something essential. What is this awakening in me? Not what they are doing to me, but what is being activated inside me. And in that moment of pause, the magic happens. You see with crystal clear clarity that the other person's behavior has nothing to do with you. You see their suffering, their confusion, their pain projecting outward in the form of aggression or manipulation or indifference. When someone attacks you, they are not speaking about you, they are screaming about their own inner hell. And you, if you are awake, can see that. Not as an excuse to tolerate abuse, but as an understanding that keeps you from taking it personally, because nothing anyone does is truly about you, even when it seems directed right at your heart. It is always about them, their fears, their traumas, their insecurities. This does not mean you should accept everything. It means you can set boundaries without hatred, say no without resentment, walk away without carrying poison. But here is the price no one tells you. When you reach this level of understanding, something breaks irreversibly in the way you relate to the world. You can no longer participate in the emotional games that sustain most human relationships. Drama no longer hooks you. Family fights feel like repetitive theater. Social media arguments deeply bore you. Gossip leaves you empty, and this turns you into someone strange, someone who doesn't fit into usual social rituals. Because most people build their bonds on the basis of shared conflict. They bond by criticizing the boss, complaining about the government, ranting about the neighbor. They create intimacy through the common enemy. But if you no longer have enemies, if you can no longer get angry, where do you place yourself? You become solitary in a very particular way. Not because you physically withdraw, but because internally you no longer resonate with the dominant emotional frequency. People feel that there is something different about you, something they cannot name but that makes them uncomfortable. It's as if you vibrate in another dimension. Some admire you for it, but most fear you because your peace reflects their chaos and they prefer not to see it. This solitude is not the solitude of abandonment, it is the solitude of lucidity. It is knowing something you cannot unlearn and that separates you from the way most people experience life. It is seeing through the veil and realizing that everyone is playing roles in a play no one consciously wrote. Everyone repeating inherited patterns, reacting from unhealed wounds, projecting shadows endlessly, and you are there, seeing the entire mechanism, unable to judge it, but also unable to participate in it as before. Osho expressed it with that mix of compassion and brutality that characterized him. He said that enlightenment is not a romantic blessing, it is a curse in disguise until you grow used to it. Because when you awaken, the world remains asleep, and you must decide whether to pretend to sleep again to fit in, or accept the strangeness of being awake among sleepwalkers. But there is a freedom in that state that cannot be bought with anything. No one can manipulate you emotionally because you no longer have the buttons they used to press. It's not that you have become insensitive, it's that you have stopped being reactive. You can feel emotions deeply, but they no longer possess you. They move through your consciousness like clouds in the sky, without rooting, without becoming internal storms. Someone tries to provoke you, and you find only compassion, not condescending compassion, but genuine understanding that this person is suffering so much that they need to provoke you to feel alive, to confirm their own importance, to distract themselves from their pain. And when you see that, anger becomes impossible, because you cannot be angry at someone who is suffering, just as you cannot be angry at a crying child. You simply see the pain behind the mask. This does not mean you become an emotional doormat. On the contrary, your boundaries become clearer and firmer than ever. But you set them from clarity, not reactivity. You can say this is not acceptable without carrying hatred. You can walk away from toxic relationships without drama. You can protect yourself without needing to turn the other person into a monster to justify your decision, because you understand that hurt people, and although you do not tolerate harm, you also do not need to demonize the aggressor to protect yourself. You simply act from self-love, which is very different from defensive egoism. Self-love needs no enemies, it only needs honesty. And that honesty allows you to see that every attack received speaks of the attacker's inner world, not of your worth. No one can diminish you with their words unless you believe they're right. And if you do not believe they're right, where is the problem? There was a monk who experienced this transformation in a radical way. For years he became furious at religious hypocrisy, at false teachers, at superficial seekers. One day, meditating on his own rage, he saw with crystal clarity that everything he hated outside also existed within him. He had been hypocritical many times. He had pretended to possess wisdom he didn't have. He had sought in a superficial way. The moment he acknowledged those shadows, his anger vanished like fog under the sun. He tried to retrieve it because the rage had given him purpose and direction, but he couldn't anymore. Only a deep acceptance of the human condition remained, with all its contradictions and beauties, and that acceptance transformed him completely. He no longer preached against anything, he simply lived from his truth, and that was enough. Now then, this is not a permanent state or a goal reached once and for all. It is a constant work of observation and honesty, because the mind is clever and will find new ways to project if you're not attentive. One day you believe you have integrated all your shadows, and the next you discover a new layer of denial. It is an infinite process of deepening, but each layer you integrate frees you a little more. Each projection you recognize returns a fragment of energy you once wasted on external conflicts. And over time, you accumulate so much recovered energy that your life changes completely. You no longer spend it on useless fights or chronic resentments or hatreds that burn you from within. You channel it toward what truly matters: creating, loving, growing, serving. So what do you do with this information? Do you discard it because it's uncomfortable? Or do you use it as a key to open doors you didn't even know existed? The next time someone angers you, stop. Don't suppress the anger. Observe it. Ask yourself what it's touching in you. What wound is being activated? What shadow is being illuminated? And if you are brutally honest with yourself, you will find the answer. It won't be pretty, it won't be comfortable, but it will be liberating. Because every integrated shadow is a step toward wholeness. And wholeness does not need enemies, does not need projection, does not need anger to feel alive. The people who stop being able to get angry are not special or superior. They simply decided to stop lying to themselves. They decided to look inward instead of pointing outward. And that act of courage cost them the comfort of blaming others, but it gave them something infinitely more valuable: psychological freedom. No one can control them emotionally because they no longer have the internal hooks where control used to latch. They are like smooth surfaces where manipulations slide off without sticking. And that doesn't make them immune to pain, it makes them immune to drama. They can feel deeply without losing themselves in the feeling. They can love without dependency. They can be alone without feeling abandoned. They can relate without needing validation. And here is the final twist of this revelation. When you stop getting angry because you understand the whole mechanism, something strange happens. Compassion becomes automatic. Not the forced compassion of someone trying to be a good person, but the natural compassion of someone who sees clearly. You see someone behaving horribly, and instead of judging them, you think how much they must be suffering to act that way. You see someone manipulating, and you think what deep fear they must have to feel the need to control everything. You see someone attacking, and you think what great wound they must carry to need to hurt. And that understanding does not justify the actions, but it contextualizes them in a way that dissolves hatred. Because hatred can only exist in ignorance when you believe other people's actions are personal attacks against you. But when you see that they are expressions of their inner suffering, hatred becomes impossible. Only understanding remains and clear boundaries. This is what separates true wisdom from spiritual naivety. The naive person says, "I forgive and forget," while repressing pain and allowing abuse. The wise person says, "I see your suffering, I understand your confusion, but I will not allow you to harm me." They set firm boundaries without emotional charge. They protect their peace without needing to destroy the other. And that is mastery, the ability to see the humanity in the one who attacks you without sacrificing your own integrity, to love without being foolish, to understand without becoming a martyr. That thin line between compassion and complicity is where the people who stop being able to get angry live. So here you are, facing a choice. You can continue using anger as a defensive weapon, as justification for your decisions, as an identity that gives you purpose, or you can let it go and discover who you are without it. The second option is frightening because anger is familiar, predictable, powerful in its own way. Without it, you feel exposed, vulnerable, naked before the world. But that nakedness is actually your strength, because when you no longer have emotional armor to defend, no one can really attack you. The blows pass through the emptiness that you are and exit the other side without causing harm, not because you are indifferent, but because you have stopped identifying with the character others believe they are attacking. And finally, after all this journey through the depths of anger and projections and shadows, we reach the simplest and most difficult truth of all. No one makes you feel anything. You generate your emotions based on your interpretations of events. That means you are completely responsible for your emotional world, not a victim of circumstances or people or destiny. Responsible. And that responsibility is terrifying because you can no longer blame anyone. But it is also liberating because it means you have the power to change your inner experience without waiting for the external world to change first. The people who stop being able to get angry reach that point of total responsibility. They assume that every emotional reaction was theirs, that every projection was their own, that every unhealed wound belonged to them. And in that act of radical ownership, they found freedom, not the freedom to do whatever they want without consequences, but the inner freedom of not being slaves to their own reactions. That is real freedom, to choose how to respond instead of reacting automatically, to create space between stimulus and response, to inhabit that space with awareness, and from there to build a life not determined by your past wounds, but by your present vision. So I ask you now, without detours and without escapes, are you willing to look at your shadows? Can you assume that every person who angers you is a mirror showing you something about yourself? Do you have the courage to let go of the comfort of blaming and embrace the discomfort of taking responsibility? Because that is the door. There is no other. You can read 1,000 books and listen to 1,000 teachers, but if you don't walk through that door, everything will be empty theory. And walking through that door hurts. It hurts to see your own lies, your own denials, your own projections. It hurts to recognize that you've been hypocritical, selfish, manipulative, everything you criticized in others. It hurts to let go of the identity built on victimhood and resentment. But on the other side of that pain lies a peace that does not depend on anything external, a freedom no one can take from you because it is born from within, a love that does not need reciprocity because it sustains itself. And that is the final secret the people who stop being able to get angry discovered. That anger was never about others, it was always about their relationship with themselves. That anger was simply distorted self-love, repressed self-compassion, unsatisfied need for validation. When they healed those wounds, when they gave themselves what they were seeking outside, anger lost its fuel. There was nothing left to defend because nothing was threatened. There were no enemies because there was no self to protect. Only consciousness remained, observing the dance of life without needing to control it. And in that surrender, they found the greatest power of all, the power to simply be without needing to prove anything, without needing to fight against anything, without needing to turn anyone into a villain to feel like a hero. That is freedom. That is peace. That is what is available to you if you are willing to do the work. Not the superficial work of positive affirmations and magical thinking, but the deep work of confronting your shadow, integrating your projections, assuming your total responsibility. It is a solitary path because few walk it. It is a painful path because it requires the death of the ego. But it is the only path toward an authentic life, toward genuine relationships, toward real love, toward yourself. And now that you have seen something you cannot unsee, that you have touched a truth that already lives within you, there is a question floating in the air. What will you do with this? Will you leave it here like another video you consumed and forgot? Or will you allow it to truly transform you? Because information without action is entertainment, and this was not entertainment, it was a mirror. There are people who need to hear this as much as you needed it 30 minutes ago. Someone in your life is trapped in anger, projecting shadows, blaming the world. And you can be the unconscious messenger who shows them the way out. Share this, not from the superiority of someone who already understood, but from the compassion of someone who knows what it's like to be asleep. A simple gesture can change a life, and you won't even know it. If something resonated with you, if these words touch something real, write in the comments, "I see the mirror," just that. And I will personally respond to you, because every person who reaches this point deserves to be seen. They're not a number, they're a soul awakening. And if you want to keep going deeper, if this was just the beginning of something bigger, subscribe and activate the bell. Not out of loyalty to the channel, but out of loyalty to your own awakening. Because what's coming is even deeper, more uncomfortable, more liberating. This doesn't end here, it's just beginning.